Hey, this is not a cooking video per se. I just got out a bunch of my cookbooks. We're still in holiday gift giving season, and I had had some requests from other videos to talk about my cookbooks and my recommendations for cookbooks. And I thought it would be a nice time to go through some of them. I am like a super cookbook nerd. I buy lots of cookbooks and I read cookbooks at night before I go to bed. I'm sort of obsessed with cookbooks. And cookbooks are how I learned to cook. When I was a kid, my mom worked, many jobs. Dinner was not the most important thing in the world. And I did love to cook as a kid, mainly because I love to eat. And so I, would learn to make peanut butter cookies out of the joy of cooking or whatever. I figured out how recipes worked fairly early on, but I would say that I did not really get into cooking until randomly buying this probably fairly obscure cookbook from a restaurant in Austin that used to exist called East Side Cafe. That was like my favorite place to go when I was in college. And I didn't really understand the concept at the time. I'd never heard of a restaurant that had a garden that grew their own vegetables and all of that. Basically, what they were doing there at the time was kind of an Austin version of what was going on in Berkeley. And I had no idea what any of that was. But it was all really fresh and new to me. And specifically, I loved making a recipe in here for a salad with a disc of breaded goat cheese that you fry in a pan with butter and serve with a raspberry vinaigrette. It's very 90s sounding to me now. But I loved it, and it would take me like an hour to make, and it's something that I could probably make in like 10 minutes now. But we soon after graduating from college my wife and I moved to California, to Berkeley. And I very quickly clued into what the local cult of food was around Chez Panisse and picked up lots of Chez Panisse books. But the two that really stuck with me, especially because we were vegetarians at the time, were this Chez Panisse vegetables book and the pasta, pizza, and calzone book. There's a recipe in this pizza and calzone book for a pizza that uses butternut squash, like roasted butternut squash and Gruyere and lemon juice. That was one of the most mind-blowing things I'd ever eaten. I couldn't afford to go to the restaurant, so all of my experience was cooking out of these books. And I made that pizza for years and years and years. And there are many things in this vegetables book that I loved. Finally, as far as like my own personal history with cooking, the Zuni Cafe cookbook. This is a San Francisco restaurant. This is a really famous book that I picked up mainly on a recommendation from a cooking blogger at some point, like 2006 or something. But it's like really, really elaborate instructions for seemingly simple food. It's basically like someone cajoling you to try to be really precise in making some excellent, time-tested recipes. There's an incredible roasted chicken recipe in this book that pretty much everyone, still loves and cooks today. Anyone who's into cookbooks and cookery has heard of it. And this was super important to me, although it really convinced me that like following the recipe is what you have to do to make a good meal. And I really focused on that for years and years and years, to the point where it just felt like I couldn't like make decent food unless I was, really closely following someone else's script. The game changer for me, and this is, if you're looking to buy a cookbook for someone who, is learning to cook, this Samin Nosrat book, Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat, from, I don't know, is it 4 years old now? 3 or 4 years old? It's basically like a textbook on learning to cook. There are recipes in it, but honestly, I've made maybe 2 of them or 3 of them ever. It's the front of the book, which is basically the basics of how to think about cooking, how to think about seasoning, how to think about using brightness and acidity, how to think about that weird moment where you're cooking something and you're like, you taste it and you're like, man, this isn't right. There's something missing. This book will teach you what's missing. And I just love it so much. I don't really refer back to it, but I learned a lot from it. And around that same time, I had a CSA, if you never heard of that, like a community share agriculture box, like a farm box. I was living in Athens, Georgia, and I would get lots and lots of stuff that I wasn't really sure what to do with. Like suddenly I would have like turnips every week. And I happened upon this excellent book from a Portland chef who divides the seasons up into like even smaller seasons and provides you with mini recipes that, you know, depending on where you live, may or may not really apply to you. But I found them to be really helpful scaffolding for creating my own seasonal recipes with things that I could get from my farm box every week. And sort of the looseness that I got from the salt, fat, acid, heat book in my cooking, my ability to like play with things really meshed with this. And these two books kind of dominated my cooking life for a while. On the side, I always have like my personal obsessions, like things that I'm trying to learn how to get a handle on, how to make. And I spent years being really interested in pasta. And I have lots of pasta books, but a couple of them are really like essential to my collection and to my learning in pasta. This Kaz Hildebrand and Jacob Kennedy book breaks up basically like every pasta shape you've heard of and pasta shapes you've never heard of into their own sections in alphabetical order. There are no pictures, it's all illustrations. And the idea is basically to match each shape with the sauce that it goes with, which as an American cooking Italian food, that information is like so obscure, you know, like when would you ever learn like which one of these shapes gets paired with which sauce or whatever. But it's full of traditional recipes, but also some modern updates and things that are outright, you know, things that Italians would probably laugh at you for making. But it's all delicious, super simple. I have cooked 60 recipes out of this book probably, and they're all winners. And I used the fresh egg pasta recipe in this book for years until I came upon this Mark Vetri book, Mastering Pasta, which has to this day my favorite formula for making egg pasta dough. I just have it memorized now, and it's what I always rely on. But there's also tons and tons of great recipes for how to use your fresh pasta, and you know, great sauces, fillings, stuff that you can really like blow your friends away with. I had a friend who graduated from a master's program, and we had her and her husband over for dinner, and I made this doppio ravioli with lamb and polenta. It's a ravioli with one side having like a lamb ragu and the other side a cheesy polenta mixture, and it's served in this sauce made from veal stock. And I worked on it for days, but I will always remember it, and I loved like putting it together, and I can't recommend this book highly enough. Another obsession of mine has been bread baking. And the thing that, you know, I went through a few books where it didn't mesh with me. I couldn't figure out how bread worked in a basic way. And Ken Forkish really does an amazing job at explaining the basics of, you know, what you're doing when you make bread dough, and sets out some really simple formulas for making, you know, yeasted doughs, but also naturally leavened doughs with sourdough starter. To this day, I make bread every 3 or 4 days, and I use basically his method. And so if you want to make bread, that's great. And another obsession of mine over the years has been ice cream. Like I said, we lived in Berkeley for years. When we moved to Georgia, I could not find like good ice cream, and I was very disappointed. And I ended up buying this David Leibowitz book, The Perfect Scoop, which has been around for a decade. These are all basically egg custard recipes, and they're all classics. I mean, like every flavor in here is delicious, with the exception of maybe the avocado flavor. I remember that one being a bit of a dud. But I was cooking out of this book, you know, every other day, making tons of ice cream when my wife was pregnant with our first child. and I hold it dearly. But the book that I eventually landed on for ice cream that became my everyday formula for if I want to make ice cream is the Jenny's Splendid Ice Cream starch ice cream base, which is a totally different thing than using eggs. Mainly in that the taste of your ice cream is not eggy, and you can do a lot more with it. The flavors in this book are way more out there and sort of teach you to play with ice cream in a way that I don't know. It's like when you start making ice cream and you make something good, you just want to stick to the formula, right? You don't want to fuck it up. But I felt playful after reading this book, and to this day I know the basic formula for Jenny's ice cream by heart, and I'll use it to make whatever I want to. And so, yeah, okay, then the final sort of mini obsession of mine has been Israeli and Middle Eastern cooking in general, starting with this classic Yotam Ottolenghi and Sami Tamimi book, Jerusalem, which sort of takes the conceit of Jerusalem being an international city where people from all over the world live, and obviously Palestinians and Israelis living together and cooking similar foods. I have no background culturally in any of these things, but for whatever reason, this book appealed to me so much, and the recipes are so delicious that it became just a regular rotational thing. I just started always having a hummus night, and always wanting cardamom chicken. That's probably the most famous recipe in this book. Yeah, here it is: chicken with caramelized rice or chicken with caramelized onion and cardamom rice. Awesome stuff. And about a year later, another book that is super popular, but that is maybe my most cooked out of book of all time, Michael Solomonov's Zahav cookbook. I've been to the restaurant. I've cooked, I don't know, 80% of the recipes in this book. I've cooked so many of the recipes from this book, and I've eaten many of the recipes in the restaurant. And I don't know if there's a book out there that does a better job of representing what a restaurant does and also being accessible to home cooks. I mean, it's mostly all home cooking. At the restaurant, they might serve it to you in a fancier way, but it's a beautiful book to read. His story is sad but kind of amazing as well, and it's just full of incredible food, and it's all food that contains meat but puts vegetables in the center of the plate, and that's kind of generally where I like to eat. So yeah, I mean, I'm still buying tons of cookbooks. I thought that maybe I would highlight a few things from this year that I wouldn't necessarily say were at the heart of my repertoire, but were things that I have loved cooking out of. First and foremost, this Namwa cookbook, which is a cookbook from a restaurant that has existed in Chinatown, Manhattan for 100 years and has, been open the entire time, but from time to time been a tea parlor or something more simple. The current owner has kind of rejuvenated it and modernized it while keeping what's essential about dim sum. And dim sum is just something that I love to eat, and I live in Oklahoma now, and there's no real possibility of dim sum. And so having a book that can teach me how to make pork bao, which I have made and are delicious, or really good fried dumplings, is just incredible. I don't know if I've learned anything from it that I could apply to my kind of slapdash, thrown together style of cooking for myself, but I love cooking these recipes and I love eating this food. And also is just a great book to read because he kind of highlights all of these different people who have returned to Chinatown in Manhattan and tried to sort of maintain the legacy of the area as it has kind of been going through rough times in the past 20 years or so. And they're all just really interesting people who are motivated by culture and food. And it's an awesome book. I really love it. Flavors of the Southeast Asian Grill. You've definitely seen me, if you've watched any of the videos that I've made. I've made a couple of recipes out of this book on video at least. But it's basically just a badass grilling book about making Southeast Asian grilled dishes, which are incredibly varied compared to like an American's idea of grilled food. There is a ton of chicken, but there's a ton of everything. And I love to grill. I love the flavors of the grill. I love Thai food. This just has everything that I want to eat in it, and it's a really fun book to read as well. And then this is the newest book by the co-author of Jerusalem that I showed you earlier, Falastin. It's a strictly Palestinian cookbook by Sami Tamimi and his co-author. This book is so elaborate, and it's nice to read. The recipes are incredibly detailed and have so many ingredients, but if you take the time to make yourself a feast of this food, it is just transporting. Like, if you can't go on vacation right now because of COVID or whatever, if you're stuck at home, I love cooking in cookbooks as a vacation, and it's absolutely worth spending an entire Saturday putting together a table of incredible food from this book. And I really recommend it. So yeah, I don't know. I'm thinking of other books that I could tell you guys about, but that's a lot of books. I will highlight other books from time to time. I guess I could, since right here, I also cook a lot of Mexican food, and I have struggled to find books that I really like to cook out of when it comes to Mexican food. And the ones that really have stuck with me are Mexican chefs who have come to the States and cook with the ingredients that we have here. I feel like there's just a better translation of the ideas behind the food. But yeah, Nopalito, this is a restaurant in San Francisco I've never visited, but everything that I've cooked out of this book has been supremely delicious. There's some awesome tostada recipes, ceviche, all kinds of like really fun, simple as this kind of food gets, but really like powerfully flavored. The My Mexico City Kitchen book. This chef has a restaurant in Mexico City called Contramar, which I really wanted to visit last time we were in Mexico City, but I could not get us a reservation. She also has a San Francisco restaurant and lives in San Francisco, and she kind of talks about her life and background. Her family were Italian immigrants to Mexico, and so she sees Mexican cooking as this much more open-ended idea, not something that's duty bound by rules or whatnot. But she has some incredible recipes in this book as well. There's a lot of seafood, which, living in the middle of the country, I don't really have access to great seafood, so I haven't got to make a lot of the seafood based recipes, but I also recommend it. All right, well, I will come back to books on another episode, I guess, but I just wanted to give you guys some ideas in case you were last-minutely looking for something to buy for a loved one who likes to cook, likes cookbooks or whatever. I'll catch you next time.